Okay, I think a few people might still be coming in, but we'll go ahead and get started here. We got a lot to cover today, so let's get to it. I want to thank everyone one more time for coming out to our webinar. Very much appreciate you guys taking your time out of the day on this lovely Wednesday here. It's 1 p.m. here in Chicago, and as our co-panelist Al Sutherland just mentioned, that means we are on our way to the weekend, so I'm excited for that as well. The webinar, as you've seen, of course, is preparing for scale, ensuring your AWS environment is ready for rapid growth. My name is Szofer. I work with SenecaGlobal. SenecaGlobal is a leading cloud services and software development firm. We're headquartered in Chicago. We've been advanced partners with AWS for 3 years, and we're continually improving our experience to bring value and stability to clients like In-telligent. Very excited to feature In-telligent today. They've been a client of ours for some time now. Glad to have them on the line and share their very compelling story. So without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce our speakers. Once again, my name is Szofer. I'm the Director of Strategic Business Development here at SenecaGlobal. I wear a few hats, including sales and marketing, aligning those efforts to what our cloud services practice is doing. I am the Alliance Lead with AWS, which means that I interact very frequently with various members of the AWS team, including solution architects, partner development managers, account owners, making sure that we as a firm are bringing the most possible value to AWS's clients. Also joining me is Al Sutherland. Al is the founder and CEO at In-telligent. In-telligent is one of our favorite clients to talk about. We've been working together for a little over a year and a half now. Very exciting story to tell, so very excited to have him on board with us. Also joining is Erick Boyd. Erick is also with me here at SenecaGlobal. He's our Vice President of Cloud Strategy and Managed Services. Erick's really the brains of our operation here. He really decides strategically where we go as a cloud organization. He is pro certified at AWS in multiple areas. I don't know if any attendees here have ever been to an AWS summit or a reInvent, but you'll see that they hand out those stickers to whatever certification you may have. I personally only have one as a cloud practitioner, but Erick, I think, has enough to cover a refrigerator with. And finally, last but certainly not least, is Taze Miller. Taze is joining us from AWS. He's a partner solutions architect there, helping various partners like SenecaGlobal bring as much possible innovative and valuable solutions to their customers. So what kind of topics are we going to cover today? Well, first we'll start off by featuring our client In-telligent and its current utilization of a highly scalable AWS environment. In-telligent is very fast growing and is a really interesting use case, and I'm excited to have Al share some of those use cases with the group here today, but also how AWS really enables all of that growth that In-telligent is facing. It's in many different areas that I'll let Al get to in a second, and it's very complex, and we really think that AWS is doing a tremendous job of enabling Al's business to grow. Next, we'll talk about using a DevOps model to maintain a stable and elastic application and infrastructure. That's something that we have to focus on, the SenecaGlobal as a firm, so that we're bringing as much value to our clients like In-telligent. We want to make sure that Al and his company is able to focus on the business so that they don't have to worry that their environment is stable and scalable. Next, we'll talk about designing overall environments according to AWS-defined best practices, and we'll briefly outline the WellArchitected Framework. That is a AWS program which we are members of that we really think is valuable for anyone sitting in AWS with any kind of workload, and it's a great set of standards to live by within AWS. We'll give some generalized tips for properly configuring auto-scaling and some common pitfalls to avoid. We'll do this at a very high level because no individual environment is the same. There's no one size fits all here, but there are some overall tips that everyone can kind of employ. And next we'll have Taze on the line, and he'll give us some common strategies for scalability. And that's again coming from an AWS PSA, straight from the horse's mouth, as it were. And at the end, we should have some time for some Q&A. If at any time during this conversation, during this panel, anyone has any questions, please feel free to enter them in the control panel of your GoToWebinar under the questions section. I will be addressing those as they come in at the end, and I'll be directing those to various panelists as they seem appropriate. So without further ado, let's get started. So who are we talking about today? I've already mentioned them several times, but it's In-telligent. As I've mentioned, In-telligent has been a client of SenecaGlobal's and AWS's for over a year and a half now. And in a nutshell, they are what you see on the screen. They're a global communications platform with patented emergency alert technology, and they utilize geofencing to deliver critical messages that override receiving devices' silent and do not disturb settings, ensuring that individuals receive time-sensitive information immediately. Now, that's really the quickest way you could put intelligent, but they really are so much more. There's so many areas in which they are playing right now, and I really can't do it justice. So, without further ado, Al, I'd like to introduce you, and we'll talk about all the great things that Intelligent is doing today.
Thank you, Zach. I'm happy to be here.
Great to have you, Al. So, tell me, what are some of the areas in which Intelligent is active right now?
So as you've highlighted on the screen, our principal areas of focus are working with federal governments around the world, local governments and municipalities, school districts, both elementary up through university school districts, sports teams, arenas, commercial office and other industrial buildings. And then when you're not done dealing with all of those issues, it also falls back to friends and family. Ultimately, as you highlighted on the last slide, we built In-telligent to be an emergency communication platform. So it's pretty easy to imagine emergencies when you're at the federal government, the local municipalities, schools, sports teams, arenas, commercial buildings. But what we found is that not just in those businessy areas, we also found that friends and family have emergency communication needs as well. So we wanted to build a platform that was broad enough so we could cover anybody's emergency communication at any time, anywhere.
That's great to hear, Al, and I imagine that's ever more relevant, obviously, in today's current climate with COVID-19. It seems like emergency communications are becoming more and more relevant as time goes on.
It is, Zach, and you know, there's two parts to it. One is the human element, which is just by keeping people more separated from each other. It just adds stress when you can't just get somebody on the phone. If you think about how these mobile devices have evolved, they've gone from, in a relatively short period of time, a device where you actually make a phone call to somebody to a device where you very rarely make actually a phone call, but you instead send out a text or email or try to connect with them through social media. When you're separated like we are, and you're not able just to get a hold of them, they're not answering a text, they're not answering an email, and then you try to get a hold of them on a phone call and they're not there, it can become stressful, whether it's because you're broken down on the side of the road, or it's because you have a business issue and you need to get a hold of one of your business partners. And so COVID has created a variety of stresses into our communication network that we believe the In-telligent platform fits really, really nicely into that breach.
That's great. And can you tell me a little bit about how In-telligent identifies which users are receiving messages? I think this is one of the more interesting parts of the business. Some of the geofencing that you guys are using to ensure that you're not just blasting out generic messages to anyone and everybody, but ensuring that the right people are receiving timely messaging.
It is such an important part of the platform. You're absolutely right, Zach. You know, in today's world, we get text messages, we get notifications, we get messaging from so many different sources that it almost becomes clutter or noise in the background. When it's really important, you want to be able to differentiate that really important messaging. When we were building the platform, we said we had to do a couple things different or better than anybody else. One is we had to be able to make a device make noise or audibly alert the recipient when an important message was coming through. So differentiate between regular messaging and those life-saving, really urgent messages. And more than happy to talk about that more later. But the other thing that we thought was really, really important was to be able to aggregate people into specific areas as they move around. When you actually send a message through our system, it's very similar to sending just a generic email or a text message, which is you come up with the group of people that you want to send the message to, you compose the message, you attach a flag to it to say it's really important or it's not important or it's just regular, and then you send it off. What we did was we said, okay, let's take that and let's add to it the ability to automatically or dynamically group people based on where they're at. So if you're thinking about a federal government or you're thinking about a school or a commercial building, when you want to send a message to people that are in a specific area, so like, for example, Chicago or Dallas or Austin or Washington, D.C., you want to be able to send that message out to the people that are in that area or a small segment of the area, like a neighborhood or a city block. Geofencing is designed to do that, but in order for you to be able to access it, we had to work with the Seneca team to be able to ensure that all of our users everywhere in the world were able to be automatically grouped into these various geofences at a moment's notice, so that when the message went out, we could automatically get to the people that were in the affected area and not bother everybody else. Because those are two very important factors. Getting the message when you're in danger is critical, but knowing that you're not going to be bothered when you're not in danger is also just as important.
Yeah, that's a really amazing differentiator for you guys, and I think it's really compelling. But it really speaks to, I think, what the overall topic here is that sounds like a lot of data going back and forth. That's a lot of information. However many users you have at any given moment, we need to know where all of those are. Obviously, whitewash, not tracking every single individual person, but making sure that they're able to be reached. This is all very important, but also sounds like a lot of technical haul that needs to be happening. So that kind of brings me to my next question, which is, why is scalability important for intelligent? And I think you've already started to touch on it, just in the fact that, when you're trying to target very specific areas, that's a lot of data going back and forth. And depending on the situation, it sounds like, the AWS environment may be taxed a little bit more heavily if there's a hurricane in one area versus a school shooting somewhere else.
Well, that's right. But let's go to that and focus on what you had said. So if you just so in order to make our system work, we relied on Seneca and working with the people at AWS to create a system where we could do two things, and these are one's something that happens every minute, and that's where we reach out and try to find where our users are or where our users' devices are, so that we can automatically include them in groups, and that's something that we do regularly throughout the course of the day. As you said, based on privacy requirements, we make sure that we're not tracking people. It's just putting them into groups or taking them out of groups, as the case may be. And we do that because of the second part that also taxes the system, which is messaging that comes out, like you were saying, fluctuation of volume, interactions. When a message comes out to people in a school, and maybe it's 1,000 people or a couple hundred people, that causes the system to spike up to 100 messages or 1,000 messages. But if it goes to a country, then it fluctuates up and spikes up to millions of users. And so you're in a situation where you not only have to constantly be grouping people and ungrouping people so that they're in the right place at the moment that the alert goes out, but then once the alert goes out, you have to get that message out to them instantly, because these messages are potentially life-saving information. You don't want to be in a situation where you go, okay, I'll get it to this group right now, but I'll get it to the rest of the people over the course of the next 5 minutes. In this case, 5 minutes could be just far too much. And so the system has to be scalable. And we talk about this with the Seneca team and the AWS support team in a three-dimensional world. It's not just XY axis, number of messages being sent to a number of people, but it's also, because of that auto grouping, it becomes a Z axis as well, where the systems have to be working all the time, both scaling up and scaling down as necessary.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Al, because it's clear to see why the system needs to be able to scale up, right? If a hurricane hits New Orleans and everyone in New Orleans needs to get the message, well, you need to make sure that they're all getting that message. But not unimportantly, for you as a business, you can't be operating your infrastructure at that peak level at all times. It wouldn't be cost effective. It wouldn't be cost friendly, which really speaks to the scaling down aspect that really AWS is one of their key value propositions, right? In that you're only paying for what you use, and it'll scale down in those lower traffic incidents so that you as a business can continue to function rather than if in the old school days where you would be running your own data center with tons of servers just for like the highest peak moment, now you don't need to work that way, which is one of the beauties of working with AWS.
Well, that's right, Zach. And to illustrate that point, you had mentioned on a prior slide, we have a partnership with Viber, one of the major messaging platforms on the planet, and they have over 1 billion users. So if you think about the ability to send out a message to somebody, and so you're automatically grouping over 1 billion people, you're then sending out a message to potentially millions of people at a moment's notice. In the old world of building a server farm, that you would have been that to be able to handle that volume with the critical time constraints that we operate under, it would have cost a ridiculous amount of money, which in order for the business to survive, we would have to charge our customers a significant amount more in order to send out our messages, making it somewhat cost prohibitive for them. By being able to work with the AWS team on both scaling up when needed, but then instantly scaling back down to a very reasonable level, what it gave us was it gave us the ability to meet our customers' needs in an efficient and effective economical way that ultimately we couldn't have done any other way. We would literally have to turn away business if we didn't have the AWS support, the scaling support team. And the way that the Seneca team has managed that environment for us is just critical.
Well, I appreciate the shout out there, Al, and we like to think that we're continually improving our environments on behalf of our clients, like In-telligent, and that kind of leads me into my next slide here, which is kind of our relationship with In-telligent as SenecaGlobal. And this is going to start being a little bit more broad, but Al, please stay on. Just to kind of talk about how knowledgeable partners, AWS partners like SenecaGlobal and many others, help companies like In-telligent. And if I can just say, our goal as a firm is to allow you to focus on growing your business and not have to worry that your environment is stable, reliable, and cost effective. Now, Al, you're the CEO. You're always going to worry a little bit about these things, but we like to think that we give you a little bit of peace of mind, knowing that maybe instead of hiring a full cloud ops team, which you can certainly do, and many enterprise level organizations do, they have their own dedicated in-house cloud operations team, making sure that everything's functioning as it should be. But frankly, for many companies, especially growing companies at the early stage of their life cycle, that's very cost prohibitive to have a cloud security architect, a cost optimization architect, people to monitor the environment at all times. You're talking about a team of 6, 7, 8, 9 people that frankly are incredibly hard to source at this day and age because they're very valuable. So the question is, how should ISVs align their engineering and cloud ops efforts? Because this is a point that we're going to come back to a couple of times, is that it's one thing to make sure that your cloud environment in AWS is running according to their best practices and it's built to be scalable and scale up, scale down, and be reliable at the same time. But there's a difference between ensuring your cloud ops efforts are up to par and ensuring that your application development is doing the same thing. Because something that can happen is if you have a monolithic application that isn't properly designed and engineered to leverage the cloud, it will be more difficult to maintain, especially the cost optimization aspect of that. many of the security and reliability components are still there, but if an application is not properly engineered to leverage those services in AWS, well, you can start running into some same problems. So, a quick tip there is to always be building your teams, whether they're outsourced or in-house. Make sure they're using the cloud DevOps model, utilizing the AWS Cloud Adoption Framework. That's a very publicly referenceable document that AWS has on their website, and always be adhering to these best practices as you move forward. But some of this might seem like, okay, how much is an environment really going to spike? And now I think you've done a pretty good job of highlighting that, but there's a really interesting story with you guys. Why did your environment need to scale, and what's kind of a moment that can really trigger a high influx of users? And what I have here is a screen grab of a tweet from the official Guatemalan government. This is the president of Guatemala, and I was going to include the video here, but it's entirely in Spanish and it's 3.5 minutes long, so I encourage anyone to go ahead and look for that on their own. But what he's doing here is announcing Alertaguate. And so for some context here, Alertaguate is an application developed that is powered by In-telligent, using the same technologies as In-telligent. It's a private labeled application that the Guatemalan government opted to utilize as their primary communications method to get information to their citizens. Now, you'll notice at the bottom of this tweet, this was on March 24th of this year, so one can imagine why this was relevant for Guatemala at this moment, and why they decided this was the time to launch this application, because of COVID-19. It had just started becoming a very dominant news item. People were panicking. It's obviously hasn't gone anywhere, but on March 24th, people really needed to know as much information as possible because everything was up in the air. The issue here was that the government of Guatemala did not properly inform Al or SenecaGlobal, who was helping, of course, to develop the application and maintain the cloud environment behind the scenes. We didn't receive proper notice, and this really led to a pretty intense situation where suddenly we received 300,000 new users in less than 12 hours. And again, with no real advance notice. We knew that at some point, it would start to roll out to various communities with Guatemala. We didn't think that the president was going to tweet it out. So we were stuck playing a bit of catch up. Not only did we have regular communications that were based on COVID to all new users, we had increased COVID-related communications across the existing base users that were already there. And this really proved to be a make or break moment, not only for In-telligent, but for SenecaGlobal and also, AWS. There was a lot riding on this. We wanted to make sure that we were bringing the best possible value to the customers at In-telligent. And by extension, the users of Alertaguate. Now, as we move forward with this over these coming weeks and days, things were a little bit hectic. We managed to keep the environment up and running. Some of the cost optimization efforts took some time to play catch up on, not so much because of the configuration of the AWS environment, but as I was mentioning before, because of some of the shortcomings of the application development. Now, part of this is because when SenecaGlobal, as a development arm for In-telligent, received the original version of the code from different developers, it wasn't quite engineered in a way to leverage the cloud. So we needed to act fast, refactor pieces of that application to make it more of a microservices. I'll start talking a little too technically for myself, so I think the best thing for me to do is to introduce Erick Boyd onto the call because he's the one who really headed up that effort as we mitigated the intense spike that In-telligent was seeing those days. So Erick, great to have you on the call with us here today.
Hey, thanks, Zach. Hello, everyone. My name is Erick Boyd. I am the VP of Cloud Strategy and Managed Services for SenecaGlobal. Thanks for having me on. So, the original effort when we first took over the In-telligent AWS environment with the managed services and various development efforts, it was rather kind of bulky and not very optimized, right? As you can imagine with most applications that when you first get them. So the first kind of effort, right, was we optimized the EC2 instances for the web and app services, running more more optimized instance types like a T3 to effectively save cost. The next effort was migrating all of the EC2 containers into AWS Fargate. Fargate has a serverless container service that we leverage to do that with. Very cost effective. So all of the web and application services were migrated to that. We also migrated off of the ELB that was being used to application load balancers, which allowed the that service alone to be kind of consolidated and allowed some cost optimization as well. Elasticache services were used for caching services between the app and the database. And then finally, we utilized RDS, right? Native RDS instances in AWS for leveraging read replicas around Amazon Aurora. So that allowed for additional performance and speed enhancements in the environment. And then finally, the last effort around this was implementing auto scaling, as Al kind of noted, for during those peak periods. This provided automatic scale up, scale down for the peak demand, also scaling back down when the demand was not needed for the application. CI/CD services were implemented for automated code deployments at a later date. And then we leveraged we had to go back and kind of do some code and database optimization for the queries and different things, utilizing these new services to kind of get the services more compact and optimized, which allowed for additional cost. And finally, we also leveraged separate AWS accounts for dev, UAT, and prod. So that was nice because it allowed us to have some separation of data and also separation of IAM services, right? So certain teams would have access to prod, where developers and UAT teams could access those individual accounts without, affecting production services.
Now, Erick,
So,
I'm just gonna go ahead and clarify for some of our audience that might be lost with some of the terms you're throwing around here. What you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is we separated. There was one giant AWS environment that handled everything, and then we separated that into a development environment, a production environment, and a UAT or a testing environment, as it were, so that we could, more segregate our efforts a little bit better and do so in a safer way, and also, limit the spend a little bit on those sections. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And there is some cost optimization in doing that effort, right? So depending on your development or business support that you're running, right, you may want to run different types of support, say in development versus production, right? So when you have that compute kind of separated into those separate accounts, it gives you some cost optimization as well.
Good to know. And, we've been talking obviously a lot about In-telligent. We're featuring them as a client, but it sounds like, and I just wanted to clarify that these are not just specific necessarily to In-telligent. Obviously, every customer is going to have their own specific needs, and there's going to be different details and flavors to every given AWS environment. However, a lot of what you're describing, we apply to many of our clients depending on the state of their current application, right?
Absolutely. Yep, that is correct.
So, taking a step away from just pure In-telligent, how do you prepare for scale as any organization, utilizing partnerships with, various partners like either SenecaGlobal, we're a consulting partner, or there's tooling partners, and what are some best practices? So, you're a cloud architect, Erick. How would you accomplish auto scaling at a very high level, knowing that there's no one answer for everybody?
So the first kind of step in doing this, right, in achieving the auto scaling is understanding what your SLA is, right? That's RPO, RTO. There's different kind of metrics around this, right? These are things like transactions per second for the SLA, users per EC2 or container. That metric could be max CPU on an instance or a container, right? So understanding what that is and defining that kind of in the auto scaling is what is the first kind of effort to do that, right? The next effort is defining those EC2 or ECS types in Fargate, which are scaled across multiple availability zones for reliability, scalability, high availability, as well. So you have a lot of durability there for your service. Plan for failure, right? Minimize any sort of issues there due to instances that happen to go down. So that's the second step, right? And then thirdly, defining those min-max values, right? So obviously you would have a minimum of 2 instances per AZ or 1 per AZ. So you always have high availability through the Amazon availability zones, right? And then your max could be whatever it takes to get to that defined value. So that could be 20 small instances or 10 large instance types, right? So it's defining those SLAs kind of works like that in the manner of the application.
Got it. So can you just really quickly just describe what you mean by multi-AZ configuration for high availability, just for the audience at large?
Yeah, absolutely. So Amazon offers, it's essentially a data center, right? So each availability zone is its own separate data center. For example, in US East 1, East Coast, there's 6 availability zones. So these are basically data centers kind of spread across the entire East Coast. And you can deploy your infrastructure across those independently all through the Amazon VPC itself. And then basically you have high availability, scalability, and reliability for the services such as EC2 and Fargate.
Got it. Thanks. So what are some quick tips to, properly prepare a cloud environment? We talked about the min-max values and everything, but looking at the right side of the slide here, when you're saying plan for failure, I think that's a good tip for anyone. You have to look for where are my holes in my environment and how can I, fill those up before they become a vulnerability.
Right, absolutely. So, I mean, typically you would want to have a minimal of 2 instances running, across 2 AZs, minimal in your configuration. If you're doing any sort of patching or plan things, you may want to add additional instance types and kind of scale either horizontally or vertical across those, across your, availability zones. So, assume that your application is going to fail, assume there's going to be some kind of error, right? And have a self-healing, self-growing model utilizing auto scale to automatically, spin up instances or, spin down instances based on what you're doing. So, at 3 a.m., you may spin down instances because the service is very unutilized, or at 9 a.m. in the morning, you may be spinning up 3, right? So you're basically leveraging that on-demand compute so that you aren't just running the maximum compute like you would in a typical data center to get your SLA, right? Your max SLA for the application. So kind of you pay for when you need it and what you're using at that time. The other element of that, right, is right-sizing those instance types to the newer kind of optimized types. A T3 or a T3A is a great example of that on an EC2, where you can essentially you spread those across your availability zones and then basically enable bursting, which is a feature set of those T3s that will automatically burst up to the next size using credits.
Now, Eric, I want to pause there because that's one of my favorite things to point out to people who are maintaining their own AWS environment and might feel a little overwhelmed. You might see something like T2 versus T3 burst, and you're talking about EC2 instances, and it can start to feel overwhelming. Rightfully so. There's a lot of things to keep an eye on here. But I was always amazed when you went through with our clients and pointed out, well, you want to switch this to this burstable instance, which in layman's terms is a more easily scalable version of an EC2 instance. EC2 instance, for even more layman's terms, is basically the Amazon equivalent of a server. But what was amazing to me is how making that change to the more modernized version is as simple as checking a box within the console, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So, resizing that instance, right, is basically just turning it off, changing the instance type, and checking the bursting box, right, to your point. And that bursting is a free option, right? So your instance accumulates credits as it runs per hour. When the bursting is needed, right? So when you need that additional compute, that bursting occurs automatically. And you can do that across all availability zones, right? So it's a great feature set.
Perfect, thanks. And yeah, you obviously have here some security compliance and auditing. That's certainly going to vary organization to organization. Not everyone's going to have the same standards or compliance standards as everyone else, but you certainly want to take advantage of that, especially if you have more sensitive information like HIPAA or PCI related applications. I want to move on to our next slide here. And talk about, the well-architected framework. I touched on this very briefly in the beginning here, and just kind of want to give a quick overview of what it is and how it can be implemented to service AWS users. So Eric, what are the five pillars as AWS defines them for the well-architected framework, and how do we use that to keep our clients on the rails, as it were?
Sure. So the pillars of the well-architected, right, are security, reliability, performance, efficiency, cost optimization, and operational excellence. And those pillars are designed to essentially provide you with some oversight as to what the kind of best practices are when designing or architecting or re-architecting and optimizing an environment, right? So this is a framework provided by AWS that is, followed by a lot of people and a lot of companies. So basically,
these aren't standards that we've just made up ourselves, right? This is an AWS program that we worked hard to be a part of because we saw the value that this is a nice way for any AWS client to really take a look at their environment and say, okay, how am I measuring up against how AWS themselves would engineer this environment?
Absolutely. And one of the main takeaways, right, for the well-architected review is what it does is it presents risk to a customer. A customer may think their environment is great, even though it's been up for, 2 years and they don't need to do anything else. There's lots of known risks, such as single point of failures in an environment that you can point out to a client and say, hey, this is a risk, and if you were to lose this service, this entire application will go down, right? So it provides a list of items, low to high, that the customer can take and implement across those pillars, and then work towards getting their environment basically optimized and in line with those security, kind of high availability, reliability, scaling factors. Performance efficiency, right, is taking items such as where you can utilize new technologies, right? So you may have cron jobs running on servers, right? You can move those to Lambda. There's a lot of things that can be kind of migrated to more of a serverless model, such as S3, Lambda, and many others, right? So operational excellence kind of covers your environment as to how you can make that environment more operationally friendly, right? These are things like playbooks, automation, guides, operational documents, things of that nature. So that's a pretty good kind of widespread view of that first question.
Yeah, so I want to take just a quick moment to kind of offer a pitch, not only for ourselves in performing the well-architected framework, but truly the well-architected framework for anyone who's running an AWS environment. Obviously, we think that it's a very useful tool for any user to take on, to measure themselves against. We have performed those regularly on all of our managed services clients. Any AWS environment we run, We perform these reviews on a quarterly basis to ensure that we're constantly improving and constantly optimizing the environments on behalf of our clients. Things are always changing. The well-architected framework is evolving, so we have to stay on top of that so that our clients can be as adherent to those best practices as possible. And for new clients, we offer those free of charge because we like to think that it's kind of a lost leader for us, right? We think that it's very useful for any AWS customer to take a look at this report and say, hey, these are all the areas that you can start remediating very quickly to make yourself more secure, more operationally excellent, more cost effective. And you can either remediate those things yourself, you can hire elsewhere, you can use someone like SenecaGlobal. But whatever you do, if you use the official well-architected program, AWS will actually credit back any remediation efforts that you do up to $5,000. So I highly recommend anyone who's interested in that program to reach out to us or to simply Google it and learn more about it. Very, very strong stuff there. So I want to move on and catch the last question for you, Erick, before we have to move on to Taze, which is, why is it important to understand the difference between a well-configured AWS environment and an application that's leveraged, that's engineered to leverage the cloud? We've touched on this a little bit, and the well-architected framework will get you only so far when it comes to the AWS technologies used, but that doesn't mean that the application is going to be able to take advantage of all of those great and wonderful things that AWS has to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of the, really it's about being aware, making the client aware, making the customer aware of what's available, taking an application and starting to decouple that application into other services, right? We talked about Lambda. We talked about using services like SES, SNS, moving things off of a traditional server with an operating system, moving it to a container, a serverless container environment like Fargate, utilizing RDS. There's lots of security tools, right? There are things like CloudWatch for metrics. These are more operational type controls and monitoring that you can leverage. Leveraging tools for security like CloudTrail, AWS Config for auditing and logging, and things like Guard Duty for data. All these things, right, are built into the product. And then reports can be generated from AWS Artifact, right, for compliance, for SOC, PCI, HIPAA, et cetera, for the underlying AWS environment. So all that tooling is built in, the services are there. They're constantly, redeveloped and new features released on almost a weekly basis or more. So it's a great advantage and real easy to use.
Thanks, Erick. Thanks for sitting in with us today. This has been really valuable. We're always glad to have you on board. But I'd love to hear a little bit. We're coming up right on time to hear from Taze Miller. So thanks again. So Taze, I saved the last, but certainly not least here. We're so excited to have you on the phone here. We've been talking enough about AWS that we should probably give you guys a chance to represent yourselves a little bit here. We're very proud of our partnership with you. We think there's a very strong reason for anyone who's venturing into the cloud to use AWS, not only because they have wonderful tools available to them, but also experts like you on the line to help facilitate their growth as clients.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that introduction. And honestly, I was totally content just sitting back and letting you all do the pitch. I think you were doing a great job. The discussion of the well-architected framework is just so essential to anybody who's building on AWS, and it's fantastic to hear how you're using that. I love that you guys are doing a quarterly basis. I think you hit a really important concept there, which is AWS is continually growing. We're adding new services, we're adding new functionality, and with that, the way that we build in the cloud also has to update. And so we do, like you said, we update that well-architected framework, and doing a quarterly review helps you stay on top of all the newest developments there. And just some context on how that came about. It wasn't just a couple people sitting in a room thinking, this sounds like a really good idea. Let's write these things down and tell people we should do it. Instead, these learnings came from thousands of architecture reviews. And we wanted to take those learnings that we had from so many of our customers and pass that on so that people were able to build things more scalably, more reliably on their own. And on that note, you know, a lot of people ask us questions like, you know, which scaling method should I use? There's always a big argument that you can find about containers versus traditional instance scaling or serverless. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be the one to come in here and say, okay, this is the clear answer. I'm going to give the kind of generic answer of it depends. However,
right, there is no one size fits all, right? Every customer is unique.
Absolutely. They're all unique in both where they are now and where they want to go. And despite that, though, I think we do have some basic considerations that anybody, no matter what they're doing, can apply to their building of a scalable application. And so I'm going to focus on that first, and then so the first area is modularity. So for those who are unfamiliar with this terminology, essentially what we want to take is an application software, and we want to construct it using loosely coupled building blocks. And so those building blocks could be things like EC2 instances or other compute functions. And what they do is they integrate through predefined common interfaces or APIs. And what this allows you to do is, one, greater agility. What you're doing is you can take a really large business problem and break it into smaller parts. This allows you to assign smaller teams to solve smaller problems, which is fantastic. This gives you a lot more organizational flexibility as well. And additionally, a super important aspect of this that Eric touched on was it helps stand up to overall application failure. One example of this that many people may be familiar with is Amazon.com. On our product page, there are hundreds of microservices running in the background, things to pull up the reviews, the pictures, the comments, just everything playing around, just playing together. And frankly, most of that can completely fail, and you would still be able to buy whatever it is that you're trying to buy. You know, and the reason we're able to do that is if for some reason there's an error retrieving a picture, we don't want that to shut down the entire page. Or if we can't pull up one person's reviews or a series of reviews, we also don't want that to inhibit you from seeing other parts of a page. And so we apply these same teachings to our own work. And so modularity is super important. However, I do want to say that there are some important considerations as you're going through that. As an architect, where it really comes your call to be a leader is deciding how small you want to break it down. And the reason I want to call that out is because some considerations you may have as you're trying to build smaller, more modular components is every time you're passing in between two components, there will be a factor of latency there. There may be more complex debugging and could be an increased operational burden. And so there's a balance that really has to be made between what your current capabilities are and what you're willing to manage. And something that was referenced earlier is automate when you can. Use CI/CD pipelines for as much of this as you possibly can, because that does allow you to have more complex breakdowns without necessarily increasing that operational burden. Now, I know there are some people who are probably sitting on this call thinking, I would love to scale my application more, but I can't break this thing down into multiple parts and have it ready. It's a huge monolithic application, and I think that that's fair. And so what I would recommend for people in that situation, number one, the easiest way that you can start to increase your scalability without refactoring anything is using a content delivery network. So something like Amazon CloudFront. Essentially what this will allow you to do is it'll rapidly scale your application on a global level by caching certain information. And so that'll reduce the load on your application, but also give access to, if you choose, a global audience. To give an example of how robust this is, Just a couple, or just I guess a month ago during Prime Day 2020, CloudFront served up 280 million HTTP requests per minute. And so that's as simple as just spinning one up and pointing it towards your application. And for people who have done that and they want more, then I think the next step that I would recommend for everyone is start small. Using different routing methods, you may be able to offset certain API functionalities. And where those are, I would encourage you to go serverless where possible. Again, that may not be possible for everything, but for the areas that you can, I would definitely recommend it. Serverless is great because it decreased your cost when it's all event driven. And so when it's off, you're not paying for anything. And when you need it, it spins up. And so I think those are just a few of the overall concepts that I would definitely encourage everybody to start looking into is modularity where possible, leverage a content delivery network, and go serverless where possible. And so on this next slide, some areas that you need to consider as you are scaling. One, plan for capacity increase. You always need to plan for your peak load because you want to be able to achieve for that. But fortunately, just because you plan for it doesn't mean you have to have that infrastructure already up and running at all times. That's one of the great benefits of the cloud. One fantastic example of this would be, if we have any gamers in the audience, Epic Games. So in just 12 months, their company grew 100 times. The user activity on Fortnite grew 100 times. That's pretty substantial. And
that's a lot.
It's a lot, right? And had they pre-provisioned all of that architecture at the beginning when they had 100 times fewer people using it, that just wouldn't be very economical for them. And so that's, in one way, capacity increase and planning on a long term. But if we want to use Fortnite as well for a short term capacity increasing, during their special events, they've seen over 8 million concurrent users at peak usage due to some of their in-game events. And what's cool about that is it's able to very quickly spin up to that and then go back down. And just for context there, that 8.3 million, their peak usage is about 10 times more than their non-peak. And so, that's a huge economic consideration for them. And so definitely plan for capacity increase and change, both increase and decrease. We kind of referred a little bit to different routings and everything in the previous stuff that I was talking about, but as you're building all of these things, deploy updated code and take advantage of features at Route 53 or your load balancing so that you can test features. You can offset little bits of load here and there and then easily be able to scale or switch back to your classic build if you need to. And then the last area I want to talk about is when it comes to building, knowledge really is power. I think Eric did a great job talking about SLA and monitoring. But the more you know about the current state of your application, the better you can plan for the future and the better you can improve its current state. And so take advantage of things like CloudWatch or third-party tools. We have a huge partner ecosystem of tools that you can also use to help with that. And so those are some of my high-level tips for everyone. And for anyone that's watching, feel free to post any questions in the chat for the next couple minutes.
I just realized I was on mute for a moment. My bad. Thanks so much.
That's okay.
Thanks so much, Taz, for all of that. That was really really helpful. We did receive a few questions in the meantime, and one of them I think goes directly to you, which is we were talking a lot about EC2 instance scaling before, but just to kind of reiterate how powerful microservices and going to the container-based approach can really help can really help an environment scale more efficiently, more effectively. But if you're using Lambda functions as your key way of doing business, I imagine that's a whole conversation that I think you could probably spend a couple of days on, correct?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And so essentially, for those who are unfamiliar, Lambda is, we like to think of it as functions as a service. And so with it, we're going to offload all of the infrastructure considerations from you, and you just need to worry about writing your code. So there's no servers that you need to manage, which is really fantastic because you can get code running just in a matter of minutes. Some considerations there, though, is these are meant to be short-lived functions. They spin up, they do their work, and then they cease to exist. And so one design functionality that you really do need in these situations is a persistence layer. So something like a database. I tend to, when I build, use NoSQL databases for those persistence layers. They tend to have a little bit better performance over your traditional relational databases. However, with a good caching method, you can choose to do that however it fits your best needs. But the key is you do need some kind of a persistence layer so that you have the actions continually recorded as you go out. But other than that, the great thing is when an event happens, you spin up those Lambdas, they run, and then once they're done, they're gone.
Awesome, Taz. That's a great insight into some of the more technical part of the conversation. And anyone who wants a deeper dive into some of these technical things, we knew we would have to keep it at a pretty high level for the group at large and say, some general strategies. But we're obviously, we've got experts on the line. We have access to people like Erick, people like Taz at any given moment. So if you want to learn more about very specific tips specific to your environment, I highly encourage you to reach out to us. I did have one more question. I know we're coming up on time. We may go a hair over, but we have achieved most of our presentation here. So anyone who needs to drop, thank you so much for joining us. We think it's been a really productive session. Al, we have a question for you. Someone said that it looked like you had an upcoming project, and they're asking if you could tell us a little bit more about that project and how it prepared to scale. I think we're talking about BuzzBell. Am I correct in that one?
That's exactly right, Zach. So thanks so much. And I'll go quick because I know, as you said, we're coming up on the edge. The BuzzBell is a brand new application. We're really excited. It's built with the help of SenecaGlobal on the AWS architecture, which will be the first of its kind chat application. So a normal messaging application that when you need to get a hold of your friends and family, you can send them an audible alert that will bust through the silent or do not disturb feature. So it's taking text messaging and it's putting it on steroids for when you truly need it. We've got incredible and great ambitions. I was listening to Taze talk about the great work that they're doing with Epic and thinking, well, we want to have the same type of growth expectations. We'd love to have 8 million people on BuzzBell at a moment's notice, and so incredibly happy that we're going to be able to, use the same architecture that they're using or similar architecture that they're using to help make sure that BuzzBell is as successful as we hope to have it as we go forward in the future. That should be launching in about 2 weeks, and right now we're doing the final testing with our Seneca team, our AWS team, and in-house developers to make sure that the app is as not only perfect and fully functioning as possible, but as beautiful as it can be. So when our users start downloading it, they really enjoy the experience.
Thanks, Al. That's really exciting stuff. Can't wait to see that launch. I did want to take just a couple minutes for those who are still hanging on. Thank you so much again for joining us. Love sharing some of our knowledge with the community at large. We know there's a lot to take on here when it comes to AWS and properly configuring environments and making sure that your environment's ready to grow. It can be stressful at times, and we hope we've at least provided some value. I wanted to talk very quickly about who SenecaGlobal is. As a firm, I mentioned a little bit out front that we are a software development firm, but also obviously a cloud services firm. We've been in the product development world for the last 10 years, actually 11 years now. We build custom-built dedicated teams on behalf of our clients like In-telligent. In-telligent has a dedicated development arm of several developers working directly for them as direct reports and have been doing so for the last year and a half. That team works directly with our cloud ops team, so we can really make sure that we're engaging in that DevOps model and ensure that the infrastructure and the application are on the same wavelength and are in sync. We are a global firm. We are headquartered here in Chicago, but we have a development center in Hyderabad, India. We are ranked number 9 as great place to work in India, which ensures that we can hang on to really great people. We feel very strongly about creating a strong work environment, so we're not your standard body shop by any means. We really believe in creating careers for our developers, and so that they stay on our client teams like In-telligence for years to come. We are dedicated partners with AWS. We've been partners for over 3 years now. We believe that AWS is the market share leader for a reason. We have put all of our eggs in that basket when it comes to cloud, and we're seeing that pay off because we know that the innovations and capabilities that are available to customers on AWS are simply unmatched anywhere else, and we've been continually improving our strengths in that environment. We are, of course, members of the WellArchitected program. Otherwise, it would have been very silly to spend so much time talking about it. We're always cost conscious on behalf of our clients, so we want to make sure that we're bringing the best possible value to them. We offer services in the area of discovery, migration, and architecture, as well as managed services. This presentation has been very focused on our managed services component, which is one of our best value adds. Simply put, we can offer a full team of cloud operations experts, including security, cost optimization, people like Erick on the line for a fraction of the cost of hiring those people yourself. You get a joint managed services team that can make you rest easy as you grow your business here. And if you're not ready to hire your own cloud operations team, which can be very costly and frankly difficult to do and hang on to people, I highly encourage you work with any managed services partner. But of course, I'd be happy if you worked with us. Thank you so much, everyone, once again, for watching. I will be distributing a recording of this webinar in the weeks to come. If you don't hear from me before then, which I'm sure you will, everyone have a great holiday next week. Thank you so much again. We've had a great time. Thank you for my panelists, Al, Erick, Taz. Thanks so much for joining. I think it's been a really great session.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And if anyone has had difficulty, I want to make sure that everyone who attended definitely gets their Grubhub credit today. Please reach out to me directly, and I'll make sure that we get that out to you. You can reach me at zach.szofer, zach.szofer at SenecaGlobal.com. And please don't hesitate to reach out. We want to make sure that you get your credit. Thanks so much for joining, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks, Zach.